Have you ever reached a moment in your life where the very ground beneath your feet seemed to vanish, as if everything you once trusted, every purpose that once pulled you forward, suddenly dissolved into silence? Imagine standing at the edge of a world you thought you understood, only to find that the map has disappeared. You are awake, yet what you see no longer fits. That is the paradox of awakening. It does not always arrive as fire and clarity. Sometimes it greets you with stillness so profound that it feels like emptiness. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to see how far this conversation is reaching. What no one tells you is that awakening is not only a revelation, it is also a rupture. It is as though you have stepped outside the theater of life, and for the first time you see the stage, the lights, the scripts, and the masks. You recognize the performance you have been part of for years, maybe decades, and in that recognition, something inside you collapses. At first it feels sacred, even liberating, like escaping a burning house into the open air. But then slowly, a strange quietness sets in. The noise that used to push you is gone. The ambitions that once energized you no longer matter. And you ask yourself, why do I feel so empty now that I finally see more clearly? I once spoke to a friend who lived through this exact storm. She was brilliant, immersed in the wisdom of spiritual thinkers, disciplined in her practice, deeply intuitive. After her own dark night of the soul, she told me she saw through illusions of identity, ambition, and external validation. Yet 2 months later, I found her lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to move. She whispered, "I thought awakening would ignite me. Instead, I feel like a flame extinguished." And I could feel the weight of her words in my own chest. Carl Jung wrote that there is a sacred threshold between the collapse of the ego and the birth of the true self. That threshold is not bright, nor is it loud. It is often silent, still, and disorienting. He described it as the chrysalis stage, where the caterpillar dissolves into formlessness before it can ever become a butterfly. That is the paradox. The death must come before the rebirth, and in that gap you may feel hollow. You see, we confuse awakening with apathy because the fuel that once kept us moving has been stripped away. What used to drive us, the pursuit of recognition, the hunger for validation, the rush to achieve, suddenly loses all meaning. And when those engines stop, it feels like we are broken. But perhaps the truth is far more mysterious. We are not broken at all. We are being reshaped from the inside out. Jung warned us not to mistake this silence for regression. He said the ego does not vanish when you awaken. It simply becomes disoriented. Imagine an actor who suddenly steps off the stage and realizes the play is not real. The actor is not dead, but the script no longer fits. In modern terms, this looks like demotivation, but in Jungian language, it is a sacred pause, the holy limbo where the old identity has dissolved and the new one has not yet appeared. Think about it. How often do we judge ourselves for being unmotivated? How often do we mistake stillness for laziness? Our culture does everything it can to push us out of that pause. We medicate it, numb it, call it depression, because we cannot imagine a transformation that does not look like constant progress. But this silence, as terrifying as it feels, is not dysfunction. It is initiation. If you are living in that void right now, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not failing. You are not broken. You are being remade. What you're experiencing is the psyche halting your old drives because they no longer align with the truth rising inside you. That truth does not roar, it hums. It does not push you to chase approval. It invites you to listen quietly to what is real. The ambitions that once kept you restless fall apart. The 5-year plans and endless checklists lose their shine. And yes, it feels frightening. But look closely. The reason those things no longer move you is not because you have lost your drive. It is because the old self that created those desires no longer lives within you. Something deeper is taking its place, but it needs silence in order to form. I think of it like this. Imagine your soul turning off the lights in a room because it is building something new in the dark. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. From within, everything is being rebuilt. The ego wants answers, wants clarity, wants movement. The self whispers instead, wait, trust, something new is being born. Jung had a word for this process: individuation. It is the lifelong work of becoming whole. Not whole in the sense of perfect, whole in the sense of authentic. A life not built on masks or applause, but on truth. When you step into individuation, the fuel of ego no longer sustains you. You begin to sense a different energy rising, one that moves not out of fear but out of alignment. I know how unsettling that can be. There were times when I felt paralyzed by this silence, afraid I would never feel passion again. But in that stillness, something unexpected emerged, a new form of motivation, quieter but far more honest. Not the rush of adrenaline, but the steady pulse of truth. It was no longer about achieving to prove my worth. It was about expressing what felt real in my soul. And here is the paradox. When you act from this place, you actually become more powerful. Because you are no longer pushing against yourself. You are moving with your inner current. You stop forcing. You begin flowing. You stop chasing clarity as a prize, and instead you recognize it when it arrives. Jung called this the symbolic life, a life not ruled by the ego's obsession with recognition, but by the deeper rhythm of the soul. And that life, while it may appear ordinary on the outside, feels extraordinary on the inside. Because everything you do is no longer about proving, it is about being. So if you are in that silent stage right now, I invite you to pause and reflect. What if this is not the end of your spark, but the clearing of space for a deeper flame? What if the emptiness you feel is not a void to escape, but a cocoon forming around you, shaping you for the life you have not yet stepped into? Take a breath here. Ask yourself gently, what desires fall flat now? Which ambitions no longer resonate? And underneath that silence, can you feel the faint pulse of something new stirring? It may not be clear yet, and that is all right. Do not rush it. This phase is not about rushing, it is about allowing. Awakening is not always fireworks. Sometimes it is ashes. But remember, ashes are not the end. They are the soil of transformation. Out of them, the deeper flame emerges. And when it does, you will know. Because it will not come with anxiety or pressure. It will come with peace. You are not lost. You are in between. You have stepped out of who you were, but you have not yet stepped into who you are becoming. That space is sacred. That silence is the birthplace of truth. So let us sit here together for a moment in the stillness. Let us honor the fact that transformation does not always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like stopping. Sometimes it looks like nothing at all. But beneath that stillness, life is rearranging itself in ways you cannot yet see. And perhaps that is the greatest act of trust, to allow yourself to remain still, even when the world tells you to keep running. Time does something to us that no teacher, no book, no sermon ever could. It doesn't rush. It doesn't plead. It simply waits. And in its waiting, it reshapes us, often without us even noticing. By the time 60 years have passed, most people think they already know themselves. But in truth, what often emerges in this stage is a version of the soul that was always hidden, waiting for silence, waiting for space, waiting for enough years to pass so that the noise of the world would finally quiet down. When you're young, the soul is like a child tugging at your sleeve, trying to whisper something important while you're distracted by the shouts of the crowd. Career, reputation, romance, mistakes, ambitions, all of these voices drown it out. You nod politely, thinking you've heard enough, but you really haven't. Only later, when the shouting softens, when ambition loses its fire and reputation loses its urgency, do you finally hear what that child soul has been saying all along? And the words surprise you. They are softer than expected, kinder than expected, but also more demanding than expected. One of the first truths it reveals is this: you were never as alone as you believed. People spend decades feeling unseen, unheard, and unloved. We assume our struggles are unique, that no one else carries the same burdens. But the soul, when it speaks after 60 years, tells a different story. It says, look again. Look at the way strangers have smiled at you in passing. Look at the time someone chose to forgive you when they didn't have to. Look at how even in your darkest nights, there was always one small light guiding you forward. The soul insists that loneliness was often a trick of perception, not a reality. Then it whispers something harder. Regret is not the enemy you thought it was. Most of us fear regret like a shadow. We avoid thinking about it, bury it under excuses, pretend we've moved on. But regret, when the soul finally explains it, is not punishment. It's a compass. Every regret you've ever carried points towards something you value deeply, but neglected. The opportunities you didn't take, the words you never spoke, the people you didn't fight harder for. Each of those regrets is a marker. And in later years, when you allow yourself to stop running, you see the map they form. They lead you toward a truer self, the person you still have time to become. This is why older souls sometimes glow with unexpected freedom. They aren't burdened by regret. They are guided by it, and yet not everyone listens. Some people reach 60, 70, even 80, still clinging to the belief that regret means failure. They turn bitter, repeating old stories like broken records. But those who listen, really listen, realize regret was always the soul's way of saying, you loved more than you lived. There's still time to change that. The soul also speaks about forgiveness, though not in the way we expect. Forgiveness is not primarily about others, it's about the self. We spend years carrying a secret ledger. Who hurt us, who betrayed us, who never apologized. But the heavier ledger, the one that truly weakens the spirit, is the one we keep against ourselves. All the times we disappointed our own ideals, all the moments we failed to rise when life demanded more, those entries remain unpaid. At 60, the soul says, erase it. Stop punishing yourself for the mistakes of a younger you who didn't know better. Stop rereading the chapter you wish had been written differently. Forgive the self that stumbled, because that stumbling self is the one that carried you here. Without its errors, you would not have the wisdom you now hold. And then comes the most surprising truth of all. The soul says, strength was never about power. For decades, we confused strength with control, dominance, the ability to bend circumstances or people to our will. But the soul, when it finally has your attention, explains that strength was always about endurance, patience, and the ability to remain soft in a hard world. Think of the grandmother who quietly raises not only her children, but also her grandchildren, never complaining, never demanding recognition. Think of the man who, after losing everything in business, still greets his neighbors with a smile. Think of the woman who forgives her sibling after 40 years of silence. These are not headlines. They are not celebrated. But they are strength in its purest form, strength that does not crush but sustains. And as this truth settles, something remarkable happens. The soul begins to loosen its grip. It no longer feels like a hidden teacher, pressing urgent lessons into your hands. It begins to feel like a companion, finally free to walk beside you. Because once you've heard these truths about loneliness, regret, forgiveness, and strength, you no longer need the soul to whisper. You carry its voice inside you, woven into your own. But the journey doesn't end there. The soul also reveals something about time itself. We often think of life as divided, youth, adulthood, old age. But the soul insists this is a human invention, a false way of measuring. In truth, there are only two kinds of time, wasted and lived. And the tragedy is not that life is short. It's that so much of it is wasted while we imagine we are preparing to live. We prepare through education, through jobs, through saving money, through building reputations. We keep waiting for the right season to arrive, not realizing that seasons have no guarantees. The soul, after 60 years, tells you plainly, living was always possible in every moment. You didn't need permission. You didn't need perfect circumstances. You just needed courage. Hearing this truth can either break you or set you free. Some cry over the decades they feel they've lost. Others rise with new determination, refusing to waste a single day more. And that difference between despair and freedom depends only on one question. Will you finally believe your soul? Imagine for a moment a person who does. At 60, instead of retreating into complaints or resignation, they choose to live more fully than they ever did at 30. They call the person they wronged and they apologize. They begin to paint, to travel, to learn a language. They spend more time with grandchildren, not out of duty but out of delight. They laugh louder, cry easier, love more fiercely. Such a person often hears others say, "You look younger every year." But it's not youth returning, it's the soul finally shining through. And this is where the greatest irony lies. We spend the first half of life trying desperately to be seen, yet the moment we allow the soul to lead, we finally become visible. Truly visible. The face may wrinkle, the hair may fade, the body may weaken, but the presence, the spirit, the soul grows undeniable. People feel it in your company. They leave conversations with you lighter, braver, more honest. Not because you gave them advice, but because you carried yourself in a way that made them remember their own soul. That is the hidden legacy of reaching this stage. It's not about wealth, achievements, or reputation. It's about becoming a mirror in which others catch a glimpse of who they truly are. So if episode 1 was the beginning of the soul's confession, then episode 2 is its deepening. The soul does not only remind you of truth, it hands you responsibility. It says, now that you know, what will you do? And that question lingers. It lingers in the quiet moments of dawn, in the silence after laughter, in the solitude of night. Because once you've heard the soul, you cannot pretend you haven't. The only choice left is whether to ignore it or to live by it.